I've told this story exactly twice in my life. Once to a combat physician named Harriet Osu, listened carefully, and then told me I was probably reading too much into it. And once to a retired Vethaal cataloger named Sovith, told me I was reading it exactly right. Between those two conversations, I carried the thing around for 11 years, not knowing which version to believe. The crash site was 3 kilometers inside Vethaal-administered territory. That was the first problem. The second problem was that only 2 of us walked away from the wreck, and my crewmate Denise Farrow had a punctured lung and couldn't carry weight. I had a fractured radius and a 4-centimeter gash across my ribs, neither of which was going to kill me. So I became the one carrying weight. We made it about 900 meters from the wreck before Denise sat down in the pale grass and said, quietly and without drama, that she needed to stop. I set her against a stone outcropping. The alien canopy above us was thin, not like earth forest, more like a grid of pale, widely spaced trees with translucent leaves that let the afternoon light through in long slanted bars. The light was gold and cool at the same time. I remember thinking it was a strange place to be sitting on a fractured arm waiting to find out if the Vethaal were going to help us or catalog us first and ask questions later. They found us in under an hour. There were 3 of them, and none of them were armed, which I knew enough to read as a professional signal. Vethaal field medics do not carry weapons. It is not a rule. It is simply that carrying weapons would contradict what they are. They are catalogers by nature and healers by profession, and those 2 things reinforce each other in a way that apparently leaves no room for a sidearm. The one who came directly to me was smaller than the other 2, not short by Vethaal standards, I learned later, just young. Maybe 20 cycles old, translated loosely to 32 years by our reckoning. She had the pale gray skin and the 4-fingered hands common to her species, and she wore a field kit strapped across her chest that I would later learn contained enough biological reference data to classify approximately 11,000 documented species. She started on Denise first. I watched her work. There is no better word for what Vethaal field medics do than work. It is quiet, economical, and completely without ceremony. She produced a scanner the size of a paperback book and passed it over Denise's chest. Read the result, in the same motion without stopping to look at it, and was already reaching into the kit for a foam sealant before the readout had finished rendering. I had the impression of a person doing long division in their head while having a conversation. Everything was parallel. Nothing was wasted. She sealed the lung in about 4 minutes. Then she came to me. She did the same initial scan, head to feet, without touching me. I held still. The readout populated. I could see it from the angle I was sitting at, a soft green panel of Vethaal glyphs that I could not read. She looked at it and kept moving, reaching for the kit. She was going to start on the ribs. Then she reached my dog tag. She had not touched it yet. She was holding the scanner, not the tag. But the scanner had picked it up. The metal, the engraved data, the blood type. I watched her eyes stop on the readout. 2 seconds. It was not a long pause in ordinary terms. You could blink and miss 2 seconds. But I had been watching this medic work for the past 7 minutes. And in that time she had not paused once. Not for the lung seal, not for the initial reads, not for the kit changes. She was the kind of person who did not pause. Hands were always ahead of her eyes by a half beat, anticipating the next thing before the current thing finished. To watch her stop, genuinely stop, eyes on the readout, hands held still, was like watching a river interrupt itself. Then she continued. She sealed the rib wound. She splinted the radius. She administered something for pain that I was grateful for and did not ask the name of. She completed her work with the same quiet efficiency she had shown with Denise, and when she finished she stood up, said something in Vethaal to her 2 colleagues, and walked back to where they had come from. No explanation, no eye contact on the way out. Denise asked me what had just happened. I told her I wasn't sure. We were extracted the following morning. I spent 2 weeks in a field hospital on the station above Vethaal Prime and another 10 days of administrative review before I was cleared to go. Home, I asked twice about the medic who had treated us. I was told both times that Vethaal medics rotated assignments on a short cycle, and she would have been reassigned before I was even admitted to the station hospital. There was no contact protocol, There was no way to ask, so I carried it. I turned it over the way you turn over something that has no edges. You can't find a grip on it. B negative. That was what was on the tag. My blood type, which I had carried around my neck for 16 years, without ever thinking very hard about it. It was a fact about me the same way my height was a fact about me. I did not know why a Vethaal medic, who had processed 11 minutes of continuous biological data without blinking, would look at those two characters on a readout and stop. Harriet Osu, when I told her, said it was probably a calibration moment. The scanner had likely flagged an unusual value and the medic had paused to confirm it was reading correctly before continuing. It was the sensible explanation, and I almost believed it. 11 years later, I was stationed at a joint outpost in the Veth Reach, and a retired Vethaal cataloger named Soveth was running the shared biology library on the station's lower level. He was old, genuinely old, by Vethaal reckoning, which put him somewhere past 120 years. And he had the patient, slightly distant manner of someone who had spent a very long time being interested in things that other people found unremarkable. I asked him about blood types. I asked him specifically about B negative in humans. He looked at me the way you look at someone who has unexpectedly asked a sensible question. He told me that B negative in a living organism of my biology had been classified by Vethaal catalogers, approximately 1100 years ago, as a theoretical impossibility. The reasoning was complicated, and I will not pretend I followed all of it. Something about protein markers and cellular oxygen exchange rates, and a cascade interaction that their earliest xenobiological models had determined could not sustain itself past its year of life. The classification had never been formally rescinded. It had simply been filed and forgotten, the way old scientific errors are, buried under 11 centuries of subsequent work. He said that the medic who treated me would have encountered that classification in her training. All Vethaal medics did. It appeared in the earliest xenobiology texts as an illustrative example of early modeling errors, a cautionary note. When the scanner returned a B-negative readout on a living adult human, she would have known what the textbook said about it. She had needed 2 seconds to decide whether to believe the textbook or the scanner. She had decided to believe the scanner, and then she had kept working. Soeth told me this without any particular sense of drama. He was simply answering the question. He seemed faintly surprised that I had not already looked it up. I thanked him and went back to my quarters and sat with it for a while. I have thought about those 2 seconds a great many times since then. I do not think they were remarkable to her. I think for a 20-cycle-old medic in a field assignment, pausing 2 seconds to override an 1100-year-old theoretical impossibility, and then continuing to treat the patient in front of her, was simply the professional thing to do. She had a job. She did the job. The impossible thing was bleeding in the pale alien grass and needed its ribs sealed, and so she sealed them. But I think about it. I think about the moment she looked at that readout. The thing her training said could not exist, moving air and waiting, and made her decision, and then moved on. She never told me. She had no reason to. I was just the data that didn't match the model. I was also the data that went home.